Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones. This is a podcast about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and today we're going to be discussing the recently released Fantastic Four First Steps. I am your host, Derek McDuff, and I'm joined today by Chris Roberts, one of the hosts of the Movie Smash podcast. He is also the founder of Off Panel Creations. How is it going, Chris?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me on here. It's a nice opportunity to talk about Marvel movies because on our show we talk about everything except Marvel movies. So
Okay.
Fun trip.
Nice. Getting this other one in here then, and yeah, so excited to have you. Before we get going, what did you want to let the people know about yourself and about Movie Smash and everything else you're working on?
No, that's great. So Movie Smash is a show where we dive into head of movies they're based on comic books or graphic novels that are outside the MCU because there are a lot of them out there. We just recorded A History of Violence and we just released Batman Hush. Off Panel Creations is the company I run that hosts Movie Smash. It's a nerdy furniture company where we build things such as comic book cabinets or board game tables. Basically, if you can imagine it, everything is custom, and that's where it all spawned from.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. As we were kind of talking before the show, I was getting some. I was just at Comic-Con and checking out all the nerdy creation stuff there, and and then after looking at your website, I was like, man, okay, this is some really cool stuff. Like you make some awesome stuff that I'm sure people there would have really appreciated and enjoyed.
Yeah, I thought about doing a Comic-Con before, but just wheeling out large cabinets did not seem like a fun thing for me. So my back would probably get thrown out from that. But we're actually in the middle of producing a pair of Star Wars cabinets that are made out of Wengi. It's this West African wood. It's going out to a collector that just loves his Star Wars figurines. So I'm looking forward to when that one goes out.
That's very cool. I love when people are inspired by their passions like that. So really cool with that. And but yeah, we're here today talking about the latest Marvel film, as I said, Fantastic Four: First Steps. We were kind of talking before the show, and you said you don't typically get out to the theater. You review a lot of older stuff. But you had been, between this and Superman a couple times recently. What was it like getting back out there in the theater for the first time in a minute?
Yeah, when I was younger, I loved going to the theaters, like in the early 2000s. When I was, coming out of college, that was just my pastime. But yeah, I have a family, kids, and it became really hard and very expensive to go out to the theater. So you had to make sure it was definitely worth it. But yeah, this past year, I got a chance to go see Fantastic Four and just saw Superman as well. Basically, I kind of looked at it as an opportunity because this is a reinventing of the DC universe. And I kind of see Fantastic Four as a new inflection point for the Marvel universe happening at the same time. And I want to sort of experience that the way they're supposed to be experienced, which is on the big screen.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a new inflection point is a good way to put it. And, we'll talk about it because obviously this is set in not the mainline Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's still an MCU movie, of course, but it's set in a different reality, of course, named after Jack Kirby's birthday, which I thought was a nice little touch. And for everybody, just so anybody knows, this is a full spoiler podcast. We're going to be spoiling the whole thing for Fantastic Four: First Steps. I will say this is the film directed by Matt Shakman, starring Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Ebon Moss Bacharach, and Joseph Quinn as the titular characters, with Julia Garner and Natasha Lyonne, who I was like, oh, I didn't realize she's in this. Paul Walter Hauser and Ralph Ineson as the voice of Galactus. So yeah, I guess I'll just ask, what did you think of this movie?
So I like that. I've been getting very tired by the MCU movies, to be very frank, which is why our show sort of doesn't focus on them to find other sort of gems that are out there. Just I think it's not from a lack of disliking them, but just more like being worn down by them because there's just so many. And I missed a couple during because my kids, so I couldn't go to theater from all. I found this to be refreshing. It really was. I liked the 50s aesthetic. I liked the way it felt. It was fun. I'm not going into specific details about the movie just yet, but it was just fun. I had some good laughs, and it didn't feel like it was necessarily part of the MC universe. It really felt like it could have been a standalone movie made without having to worry about everything else. Now, mind you, it is connected, but at the time, experience it, it didn't feel like I had to have watched everything up to this point. I could just go in, enjoy it, and be done if I wanted to.
Yeah, honestly, this movie, I think if you have never seen an MCU movie or a Marvel movie before, this completely works. It's kind of the opposite of something like a Deadpool and Wolverine. Where you have to have seen so many things, both inside and outside the MCU, to get a lot of the references and what's going on there and understand the characters. Whereas this is like I said, since it's set in another, universe than the most of those movies, it's just kind of doing its own thing, introducing you to these new characters before in this world that we have never seen before. It's like you mentioned, this is a kind of 50s inspired, but it's 50s, but it's like retro futurism 50s with flying cars and all this technology that is both old and new. And I really enjoyed that. I love the stuff like, all the kind of old product placement stuff. Like there's like a Pan Am building and there's like billboards in Times Square for Canada Dry and stuff like that. I really dug that. I loved like all the old school looking spaceships. This obviously is more reminiscent of what we thought like the 1980s would look like in the 1950s is the best way to describe what this movie is. I was a very big fan of the whole aesthetic, but I also really appreciated the plot of this movie, that it's it felt a little less like it felt more personal. It was about kind of saving one kid. Obviously, it's about saving the entire world, but they do that by essentially saving one kid, by not sacrificing one kid to save the whole world. I really liked that, and it felt there is like a big climactic action sequence, but it didn't feel stereotypical superhero with the blue sky beam and everything, and just like, oh, we've got to fight a million bad guys. It's just kind of four smart people using their powers to solve a problem, and that problem is a big spaceman is coming here to eat the planet. And how do we solve that? And they have some plans that don't work. We're gonna move the planet to a new solar system, and then some plan. And just like a good sci-fi space movie, it feels much more akin to a sci-fi classic than it does a lot of the superhero genre at points. Where it's like, okay, we have all these plans, we're trying all these things, and finally, are we able to be victorious with Plan E? So I don't know. What did you think of the overall kind of plot and characters of this film?
Yeah, the kind of tone I felt after coming out of this movie was that it felt more comic booky than what we've seen lately. It felt like, especially the first act, felt very much like watching a live action comic, which we don't really see too often. Normally, producers and directors are trying to make it more grounded and just sort of take the IP and run with it in a normal universe, if that makes sense. And it becomes more sci-fi than comic book. This, I mean, they had the whole thing with the Mole Man. They had the whole thing of just going through the litany of challenges the Fantastic Four has had to face in their past by doing that retro viewing of their history. And you mentioned something there a second ago about sort of there was no blue sky beam. Isn't it weird to say that is a refreshing take?
It really is. You see, it's just so prevalent in modern superhero movies, and it was funny. I was listening to a review of slight spoilers for Superman. I was listening to a review of Superman. They were like, "There isn't a blue sky beam. There's a black black floor beam, essentially." So they mixed it up a little bit in that, but this is even more different than that. It's a much different take, which, yeah, like you said, it's weird that that's so refreshing, but it really is.
It's interesting because if you look at sci-fi movies over history, it's always a lot of movies come out with the same solution. For a while, it was nuking it. You always had to nuke it. Then it became EMP waves, and then it became nanobots, and then it became like infecting their computers with a virus. And now it's blue sky beams. So I'm glad we're moving whatever that next phase is going to be of sci-fi. We're moving into it because whoever came up with the sky beam, SFX package can no longer sell it.
Yes, that's a good point. So I think we've kind of like hit the the point of no return with the sky beams. Like, we've just been overloaded by them, and now we're finally starting to see some different stuff, which is nice. But I just wanted to ask, how familiar familiar are you with just like the Fantastic Four as characters going into this? Have you seen like other films? Have you seen like old shows and stuff like that? Have you read any of the comics?
So the Fantastic Four, as I was aware of them, I actually saw the animated show, when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But I was never I never read the comic extensively. I've read Fantastic Four comics, but I didn't subscribe to it or anything like that. So I was fully aware of who they were, but I didn't know like the deep lore around them. Now around movies, I've seen all the previous Fantastic Four movies except for the one that got shelved for an IP
Right.
issue. But it was kind of interesting though, looking at the Fox's Fantastic Four movie, The Rise of the Silver Surfer, versus this one, because
Hmm.
they're almost, I want to say they're the same movie, but it's the same villain, right? We have the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
villain, the same beats are in it, and it was interesting to watch the two different studios on their take on how they handled that storyline. So I don't know, is it authentic or either of those authentic? Or I do know both those Silver Surfers are in canon, so no,
Hmm.
but I don't know. I didn't know which one's more authentic take. That being said, it was interesting to see Galactus in an actual sort of the way he's seen in the books versus what they came up with the Fox movies, which is a big cloud that eats everything.
Like that Fox movie, those Fox movies feel like they're from the era of when superhero movies were kind of embarrassed to be superhero movies, and they're like, I was just watching for the first time that Daredevil movie that came out, a few years prior to that, and that thing is trying so hard to be cool, and it is just failing completely. And the Fantastic Four movies that Fox did in the aughts were not trying as hard to be cool, but they were definitely trying to be quote unquote more realistic, like where they're like, well, Galactus, they felt afraid to be silly, I guess. And so they're like, okay, well, instead of making him just a big man, he's a space cloud, because that, I guess, feels more I
Real?
guess real. Yeah, like I guess if like something is gonna come eat your planet for space, let's just make it this amorphous cloud. So that was but this just fully leans into the silliness in a way that like most even now superhero movies have like embraced that, but this even kind of goes to that next level with like this movie is just really just vibing with that like early Kirby is just like bizarre, like, and there was even like I noticed at the beginning they're fighting like this and I'm not the biggest Fantastic Four guy. I know them mostly through osmosis. Like I read Ultimate stuff back in the day, and they would pop like Ultimate Spider-Man and X-Men, and they would pop into one of those panels, and or they would show up on like the old Spider-Man TV show. So because Marvel stuff is always crossing over, I would know them from that. But I remember seeing there's a point when like the four of them are fighting this kind of gelatinous monster, and I was like, that's like one of the original covers from Fantastic Four. It might even be the first one. I'm not sure. I'm sure someone listening will be able to yell at us and tell me. But I really liked kind of that callback to that old 60s style that wasn't afraid to be a little ridiculous.
Yeah, you're sort of talking about the old Fantastic Four movies, and we actually covered the original Fantastic Four movie. Oh, I mean the original, the 2000s
Mm.
Fox version. I think maybe even last year. We also did the Daredevil one, and it was interesting. That was an era of movies where you're right; they were trying to get a little serious, but they also couldn't get away from the weirdness of the
Yeah.
source materials. And I think we were discussing during the show at the time. The Fantastic Four movie that came out at the time was essentially the end of that era. And they tried to get
Right.
it with Silver Surfer, but it was kind of in an era because that's when Batman Begins started coming out. And the
Mm.
Nolan Batmans and really that dark and gritty, which eventually led us to like the Snyderverse and all this other stuff. But it was kind of the end of the let's try embracing the source material a little bit, but try grounding it. And then all of a sudden we get to sort of dark, gritty, move completely away from campiness because Batman and Robin was so bad, all these things. But
Yeah.
it's
So
nice to see us coming back to this campiness a little bit. And because Galactus, it's a little ridiculous. He's this giant thing that literally eats planets. And with Superman too, like that was getting a little campy as well, in a good way, not a bad way. I enjoyed both the films.
yeah, both are very campy, and like you said, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, obviously, as you mentioned, comes out 2 years after Batman Begins. It comes out just 1 year before Iron Man, before that really changes superhero movies. I think those two are, I've mentioned before on the show, probably the two most important movies when it comes to superhero movies. Maybe along with, I guess, Spider-Man 2, when it comes to like the modern landscape of what we have today. So yeah, like that one, it's like I said, a very similar plot, but handled a lot differently. I don't remember that one as well as the first Fantastic Four that, that with that cast with Chris Evans and everybody. But yeah, like it was definitely that more self-serious thing. But yeah, so obviously, like we said, inspired by a lot of that old school stuff. We've got Herbie in here from like that old, 60s TV show. There is also direct references to that TV show, but there were some inspirations that in this that I was kind of not expecting. Like we talked about how it's inspired by a lot of this old school sci-fi, and I think there's even a lot of Interstellar in this, which I was not expecting at all. Like that whole sequence with the black hole was really reminding me of particular points of Interstellar, and when they're doing the fast and light travel and they're like we have to slingshot around this thing. I thought all that was really cool. I'm a big fan of that film. Did do you agree? Do you think there's some of that inspiration, or is there any other inspirations that you noticed in the movie?
Yeah, it felt a lot more about sort of how like the sci-fi movies of that time of the 60s and the 70s, because that I actually the reminiscence I got during the I never saw Interstellar, so I could make that reference. I've seen the trailers and I've got an idea for it. I just never had the time. Like I said, kids.
Yeah.
But actually, I got this weird feeling of the movie Black Hole from Disney from
Ooh.
a very long time ago about sort
Yeah.
of going in, time dilation, things gets crushed. So like that level of we're gonna get destroyed by going anywhere near the event horizon
Mhm.
was what I was getting a sense of. And also how movies at that time used to treat space travel. It's dangerous,
Mhm.
but it's noisy, and you got a slingshot around a planet like in one of the Star Trek movies. And
Mhm.
of course, they didn't go back in time in this one.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
the
definitely.
Yeah, I actually recently rented the National Air and Space Museum. I live
Oh.
just outside of DC, and the reason I bring it up was just last month when I went. They actually have a display on sort of what they thought the future was going to look like, and this thing just nailed the aesthetics. I really feel like someone went to that museum, just took a lot of photos, and just put it on the big screen. They really nailed it.
Yeah, yeah, and since so like living here on the other side of the country, I live 10 minutes from Disneyland, and the thing that it reminded me of is Tomorrowland, but specifically Tomorrowland of when the park opened in the 50s, and how it really really captures that aesthetic, especially with that like their Fantastic Four spaceship. I thought that was so cool, but kind of bringing that like retro futuristic style into a more modern context. They like you said, they really really nail that. So was a big fan of that. But another thing I think they nail is something that a lot of these Fantastic Four movies have had a problem with, because I think this is, I don't think it's controversial to say, of all the versions of Fantastic Four we've got the two that came out in that series that we referenced, but you also have the Roger Corman film that, like you, as we mentioned, was never officially released, but you can find it on the internet. And then there's, of course, the Josh Trank version, which is pretty universally despised, I would say it's fair to say. Where this one, people are digging. It's doing well at the box office. It's doing well with critics. And I think a big core part of that, other than all the, the aesthetics and the no sky beam and all we said, is that I think the connections between these characters feel very real and organic. This feels like a family. This feels like like family and friends and people who care about each other and just want to save a young life. And they're interesting and flawed. I think that especially Mr. Fantastic is a really cool character who is pretty deeply like he wears, this burden that he has of just being very intelligent, and he like there's this point when he gets on not quite a fight, but there's some real tension between him and his wife, Sue Storm, about like he on a intellectual level realizes it's probably the morally, like ethically, like sensible choice to like give up their child to save the world, but he knows he can't do that and that she would never accept him for doing that. But he knows that that's what he probably should do given the quote unquote the math, and it was reminding me a lot of, I don't know if you had seen this film because you talk about not seeing a lot of Marvel films, but in Infinity War, when
Mhm.
Captain America, who's kind of the opposite of that, he's kind of just like this Boy Scout he has this line of "We don't trade lives," and that's what I kept thinking of watching this movie.
Oh yeah, to circle back to something you said about Tomorrowland. It's as soon as you
Hmm.
said that, I just popped in my head. I just want to get it out there before I forget it. It really reminds me of the old World's Fairs of
Yes,
what they
yes,
thought the future was, and that's
yes.
that's probably nails the aesthetic more than anything else we've said for that.
Yeah, and
Um,
to say touch on that too, yeah, because that was something that a lot Disney was like often at. Like a lot of their attractions at World Fairs are now at Disneyland or Disney World.
yeah, it's like that the car they drive around.
Yeah,
That could be at a World's Fair.
yeah, absolutely.
But bringing back to Richards, I think you're right. It's like he did nail the part of how do I put it? Like I need to balance every possible outcome. I need to think of the terrible things so those terrible things don't happen. And I think now I've been given this fact and I think it's true, so I keep putting it out in the universe hoping it is because I don't be saying that they're wrong. But I believe Mr. Fantastic is the first canonically autistic character in comic books, at least the two major studios.
I mean,
Now,
that
mind you,
checks out. Like, I can't back that up one or the other, but it makes sense.
now I think it is a sort of a retcon that happened
Mm,
later because
right,
autism wasn't as big back then when it came out, but I believe
right.
that's sort of what they're trying to purvey with it. One of the reasons I think this one works, where besides embracing the aesthetics and all that, besides the style of it, and why the other ones didn't work as well, is this is not an origin story, and I love it for
Mm.
that. I on our show you hear us talk all the time, like we just cannot stand origin stories. Like I don't need to see Batman's parents getting killed again. Like I really don't need to see that again. And for this
Yeah.
is I don't need they just it was like not a flashback. It was a guy on a television show saying like this is what happened. Let's move
Mm.
on. And I and I like that because I don't need that retelling again. These characters are so iconic that we know there was an accident. Even if you only tangentially know the Fantastic Four, you know they went in space. There were some cosmic rays. That's how they got their powers. Right? Very simple, very early superhero sort of lore. And I don't need to see that again, which means now we can embrace a bigger threat than we would have as an origin story. Because origin stories, you really can't have world-ending events because it's that means you're starting way too big. This they could go right into a literal world-ending event, and we know they have the chops to handle it because of all the things they've done in the past, such as fight Mole Man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you bring up a good point in that they kind of jump right in. They skip over the origin story. I was thinking of probably because I just saw a panel with all the creators on it. But the Spectacular Spider-Man TV show from like the early 2010s or something like that, or late aughts. And how that skips the Spider-Man story, which you've seen so many times, and jumps right into it and touches a little bit in the theme song. But we all know Spider-Man got bit by that spider in the same way that we all even if we don't necessarily like most people know they went to space, they got powers, they kind of just brush over that. We don't need to see it. We've seen enough superhero origin stories, and then like you say, we can get right into it, which is some people are always like, oh, the second superhero movie is kind of always the better one because they don't have to waste time on that origin story. They can get more into these interesting threats and stuff like that. And I think this movie skips that first one and is able to be just like essentially a sequel. And something else that I thought this movie was did really well and was really unique was because it is not set in the world that we know, because it's set in this Earth 828, as it says in the opening crawl. I actually was wondering. I was like, and there is I'll just say it's not a spoiler for the movie itself, but there's a spoiler for the post credit scene in Thunderbolts that we know that at some point the Fantastic Four's ship will cross over to the mainline. Then it's also not a spoiler because we know these guys are obviously going to show up with the heroes that we know and love. Because it's set in this other world, I was like, this isn't the Earth we know. Maybe this Earth will get eaten. I actually had that tension, whereas like every other superhero movie, it's like, yeah, they're gonna save the world. Which is why Avengers Infinity War had such a shocking endings, because the bad guy wins. He snaps out half the universe. And obviously they later on did that, but this one I felt like because it's set in this world that we don't know, there aren't these other established characters, the stakes felt very high. It felt like they theoretically could lose and they would have to like escape this reality or something and come to the other reality. Obviously that doesn't happen, but it felt like a very real possibility. Did you feel that at all?
I'm glad you said that because that's when I was watching. I like to think through like what the possible ending of the movie is going to be. I was at
Mm.
that jerk in the theater during Sixth Sense who said, "Oh, he's dead." Like that was me.
Yeah.
So I was sitting there in the theater and I'm like, how are they going to pull this off? Like the whole time I'm thinking, how are they going to get these characters in the actual MCU universe? Like what is the method for it? And I was like, oh, it's going to be the teleporter. They're going to teleport. Maybe they're going to run and Galactus is going to chase them. That's the connection. Then they're talking about, oh, we're going to teleport the Earth into another part of the galaxy. Like, oh no, it's going to merge with the current Earth. That's what they're going to pull off. Like somehow those two worlds are going to come together, and that's how the mutants come about. Like maybe they're going to do that. Maybe that's the weird sciencey way they're going to get out of that. And of course, that's not what it is at all. And the whole time I'm like, maybe it's going to be a post credit scene. Maybe that's how they're going to cross over. But the movie never goes there. It never tells us how it happened. Now I haven't seen Thunderbolt, so I haven't seen that post credit scene you're talking about. So I was going completely blind on like how this crossover could possibly occur.
Hmm.
And one thing I did want to say, I want to circle back a little bit. We were talking about origin stories and level of threats. We discussed the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie about a year or so ago, and that had that problem. It's an origin story, but then they made the stakes so big,
Right.
with him coming and basically destroy the planet. Almost, it's basically Galactus, like he's coming in to eat the world. And it was another giant cloud, which is, I guess, that was that time period where giant clouds eat everything.
Yes, giant space clouds.
Exactly. With insatiable appetites.
Yeah.
This movie, so as a sort of just a counterpoint to it is like, I'm glad they didn't go that route, which is another reason why I'm glad they skipped the origin story so we can have these stakes. So watching this movie, I really felt there was a possible way this world wasn't going to succeed. I knew the kid wouldn't get stolen, but I had a feeling maybe they're going to flee to the current universe. Maybe they're going to merge the universes. And then they'll have, I forget what it's called in the Doctor Strange movie, when you have two universes collide.
Oh, incursion, I think is what they say.
Yeah, an incursion event. So I was like, maybe this will create an incursion event. Like there are all those things that I was trying to think through as like, what is the possible ending for this? How are they going to cross it over? And they don't, which actually makes me happier because it really is a single shot movie that they can connect later. But if you have watched none of the MCU, it is a good place to jump onto it because there's nothing you have to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I was kind of expecting to show up in this movie that didn't, like, obviously, other than I also thought there was going to be some kind of crossover at the end. They were going to escape the universe, or they were going to, lose a fight with Galactus, and they would survive, but they would be thrown in, or something. And it does show up for a split second in the first post credit scene. But I was kind of expecting. I was like, is this going to be the first time? We're going to see Robert Downey Jr. as Doom, and we see the back of his head. So it's clearly, they didn't get him on set for this movie.
Oh, it's him.
Is it really him?
Yeah, he had an interview. He said it was actually him.
Wow. Okay. That, because it felt like I don't know if you saw Shazam, where they couldn't get Henry Cavill, so they just have like his torso, Superman's torso.
It's like the end of Peacemaker, where there's only like the neck down, or Thanos was the actor changed 3 times during the post-credit scenes.
Yeah, but yeah, okay, that's surprise. I didn't like, because I was thinking, okay, you want to get him in there, so that's interesting that was actually RDJ on set. That's really cool.
If you believe the various internet articles that are out there.
That's fair. That's fair. You always got to take those with a grain of salt.
I'm putting my little asterisk on there. That is not me reporting that. That's just me reporting on the reporting I've seen. Okay,
interesting. So yeah, I mean, how do you feel like, about, because obviously this film kind of flips what those other 2 Fantastic Four films did, where, they introduced Doom in the first one, then Galactus is the big bad in the second one. This one, obviously, Galactus is the big bad, and they're setting up Doom to be the big bad in the second one, and obviously he seems interested with Franklin Richards, who, as we know from this movie, is incredibly, supremely powerful to the point where a god older than the universe is like, hey, I'm gonna like transfer my power to you, or whatever was gonna happen with that. That's kind of left like interestingly ominous. But now we see that Doom is gonna take interest in him, and I think like they're hinting Doom is probably gonna be since the name of one of the movies is Doomsday, or the Avengers movies, that he's going to be the next introduced big bad. What do you think about them kind of like setting that up for a split second here?
Sure. At the end of the movie, if you sit all the way to the end, it says the Fantastic Four will return in Avengers Doomsday.
Yeah.
So somehow it's got to be him causing the crossover, or he destroys the planet or something. So I think it's the reason for the crossover is going to be them chasing him, or something along those lines. from one universe to the next, because I can't imagine like if they were to go first, he would follow because he wants the world. I don't think he cares which one it is.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to do something like, because you brought up incursions. I think they're going to probably do something with like incursions between worlds and stuff, and like Doom is going to try to cross over this universe with this universe. Something I know. I'm not an expert on comics, but I know through osmosis that there's, in the the actual comics that they're sort of, those Avengers movies are going to be drawing inspiration from. Doom is the big bad guy, and he creates this world called Battle World where everyone's fighting. I also know that Franklin Richards, I guess, is, and they might change this, but he's like, I guess, the most powerful mutant like X-Men style mutant in Marvel, like more than like Xavier or Apocalypse or anything like that. So I'm interested to see like what happens to that character, because they hint that like, yeah, he is supremely powerful. Obviously, we see he is able to bring his mom back from the dead. That's the only thing we see him do. But the fact that like Galactus is so interested in, they are unable to, like he says, he's hiding his power from you. Curious to see what happens with that guy, and where they take the direction with this. Like, any other thoughts on like the direction Marvel is heading now? Because I did like we both obviously like this movie a lot. I know you didn't see Thunderbolts, but I thought that was really good. So that's at least 2 movies in a row that were really good. I also think, they had some good shows recently. Ironheart was pretty solid. Daredevil was great, I thought.
Yeah, my daughter, she's off to college in the fall. She saw Thunderbolts and she gave it a high mark. She said best thing she's seen from the Marvel universe since Endgame. So I don't know how people might take that, if that's a bad hot take or not.
That's not the first time I've heard that exact sentence. I'll just say that.
Good. So I haven't seen Ironheart yet. I kind of fell off the TV shows around Echo, just because I can only fill so much my viewing time in there.
Right.
But this is, for me, I think this is a great movie. It's not, no, I think it's a good sort of rekindling of the MCU, and I hope they take lessons from this movie and carry it forward. Now, when it comes to Franklin, the original question, the actual question you asked me, I think he's got to be the catalyst for what happens next, because they've hinted at too much of what he can do. Now, on our show, we have a gentleman named Fergal. He's our comic historian. He's the guy that knows everything about comics. He has a comic book store. He's that guy that's read everything. And he was saying that Franklin is so powerful that at one point he becomes Galactus later on. Like, that's not an unusual thing. And Galactus becomes his herald. So it's this character, Franklin, is sort of, he might suffer from the problem of what Superman suffers from sometimes, of being too powerful, where there are no stakes because of him. So I am curious how they're going to handle a character like that, because you had the same thing with like Captain Marvel, where she's almost infinitely powerful because of the cosmic rays. So how do you handle a character like that? It's important. Like with the recent Superman movie, I think they did a great job with that, how they handled that issue.
Yeah,
but I'm curious, Franklin, who might be even more powerful than Superman, because he's like almost like a god. How are they going to handle that, unless it becomes like he's a catalyst for something, and he sort of sidesteps out of the show, kind of situation where he's off in the ether, fighting cosmic entities like Celestials or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I think of. Like, I generally like the Wachowski's films, but I think that a problem that the Matrix sequels suffered from a lot was Neo at the end of the first one goes on his hero's journey, becomes infinitely powerful. How do you have an interesting world for that character? And the ways they find, I think, are sometimes quite convoluted and not great. So it is always a tough challenge, and something I think hinders like you said, a lot of superhero movies. And obviously he's going to be even more powerful. So I think they're going to do something very interesting with him. But yeah, other than him, I just wanted to talk about, before we wrap up, the characters of this movie. I think that all the characters are really cool, interesting characters. I think all the performances are really great. Obviously, we talked about Mr. Fantastic a bit. Is there any other characters in this that you wanted to touch on a little bit?
Yeah. His name just completely escaped me. The guy that turns into the Flaming Torch.
Oh, Human Torch. Yeah.
Human Torch. So I don't know why I blanked on that. Like, of all the characters, I like this portrayal of the Human Torch, because he's not just like because we covered Fantastic Four before, and he's like this basically a stunt guy, right? He's an adrenaline junkie, which kind of matches the Fire, but in this, he's also pretty smart, right? He deciphered a language in a day. I mean, he's not just a kid brother. which is how he always has felt. He actually is intelligent. He should be on the team, not just because he has superpowers, because he actually is smart, though nobody pays attention to him like we do with all our kid brothers.
Yeah,
so I liked his portrayal of that. I liked how they set him up to be not just like the guy that sets like, kids caught on fire and does like the extreme stunts. He actually knows what he's doing. He just needs to be listened to.
Yeah, and the Chris Evans version of that character, well, I like that performance a lot, and it was really cool to see him in slight spoilers, Deadpool and Wolverine. It was cool to see him come back. He's kind of like definitely that like very like over sexualized like early 2000s like, hey, this is a cool guy kind of thing. Whereas this, it feels like, yeah, like he has that line where it's like Johnny loves space, Johnny loves girls, and he has this interesting connection with the Silver Surfer, Shala Ball, but it's less of like, it's like, oh yeah, like pretty silver lady, and he like there's a couple funny beats where he's like, oh, she's sexy and stuff like that, but it's not hyper to like the point that it was in those other movies. And it also feels like, yeah, he's a more well-rounded, realistic character. He has those elements, but he also, like he said, he cares about space. He's like able to decipher this whole language while everyone else is trying to solve this problem on the ground. He's able to like figure this thing out, and he has something that I like about Johnny Storm in the versions that I've seen is he's probably the character that's able to relate to other people the most. As we've said, like Mr. Fantastic is autistic, or at the very least like autistic coded, where he sometimes has difficulty connecting with other people. I think Sue is fine. She's able to kind of talk to people and stuff like that. Obviously, the Thing has some difficulty connecting with people because of his appearance. He tries to be nice to kids and stuff like that. He has this nice beat with Natasha Lyonne, but he's very much an introvert and someone who is closed off partially because of his appearance, and that's something that the old movies did hit on decently. But Johnny Storm, he's a friendly guy who is able to make these connections very quickly with people. He's famously in the comics like one of Spider-Man, Peter Parker's best friends. So I really liked him. He's definitely my favorite Fantastic Four character, like in general, and he was once again in this. Is he your favorite, or do you have one you relate to most?
No, he's actually of the four, he would probably be my favorite one. My son is autistic, so the whole fact that Mr. Fantastic is coded as being autistic as well was resonated very well with my son. Just to put that out there. But nice. For me, I like Johnny. I did like how they did the Thing a little bit. I actually like the Thing more from the Fox Fantastic Four movies than I did the Thing in this one. Not because he was bad, but because I like the sort of the broodiness of the guy who's like struggling with the fact that he is no longer human. Like, how do I deal with that? Like, how do I... Now, mind you, they didn't do a good job of portraying that with the original Fantastic Four movies. Like, he gets over it pretty fast.
Yeah.
But here, obviously, it's years since it's happened, so he's probably beyond accepting that. And I did like the fact that he actually grows a beard.
Yeah, like that was a nice touch. Yeah, that was a nice touch. And like I said, yeah, I'm a huge Natasha Lyonne fan, so it was really cool to see her pop up in this, even if she didn't have a huge part. Do you think like she got cut out, or they like just say building her up for something? Because it feels like, oh, you cast her, with the intention of her having a more interesting part. Do you think she'll come back in a bigger capacity, maybe?
I don't know, because like I was expecting more from that. Like when I saw her come, I didn't know she was in the movie till she pops up on the screen.
Yeah, same.
My first thought was Russian Doll and everything she's been in recently, and she did a great job not doing her normal accent.
Yeah,
that was the biggest thing I said when I saw her. I was like, wow, she's really reining that thing in.
Yeah, the most New York. Like, they're still in Brooklyn, but she's still doing a New York accent a little bit, but it's not like the most New York accent you ever heard, which she usually has.
Exactly. So I'm kind of wondering. Like the problem I was having, not problem, but obviously when you see a bigger actor or actress in a role, you're saying to yourself like, there's a weight to that. They're going to use them for something, right? It's the weight of the actor. The biggest known actor is always the villain. That they weren't a hero in the very beginning of the movie kind of situation. Yeah. So I was wondering like, how is she going to become that? And they kind of didn't really make her like that much of like a love interest. He's infatuated with her, but that's it, right?
Yeah,
it's not like there's this whole plot line of will they, won't they, or anything like that. So I am curious when the director's commentary comes out, if they talk about that at all. Like, how much was left on the cutting room floor? Because there is a good possibility, because she's in it, but nothing really happens with her, except for, he brings a bag of cookies.
Yeah. Just to keep on the topic of that real fast, I like that she's like a teacher. She works at like, it looks like a I don't know, like I would say, like I don't know what the Jewish equivalent of a Sunday school is, or like temple, I guess she works at, which I thought was a nice way to reference the fact that Ben Grimm is a Jewish comics character, and that's something that doesn't come up a lot in the movies. I like that it got like a little bit of a shout out here. I thought that was cool.
Oh yeah, it was nice, especially when he shows up. Which I thought they were at first. I thought she was in sort of like shelter
Mm,
when the city's being attacked by Galactus and everyone else has gone to Subterranea, and she's in this room with a bunch of other people. I thought maybe she's like a shelter or something like that. And then he comes in and she's like, "Are you here for spiritual guidance?" And then I
right,
realized, of course,
yeah,
where she actually is and notice the things on the wall. And I'm like, I am so oblivious sometimes.
yeah.
But it was nice. It was a nice different take that no, because you could see them going the route of him showing up and her falling for him in this one random moment. But no, she doesn't know him. No, she saw him once in
Right,
the street.
yeah.
So it was an interesting. I think they portrayed it better than they would have done 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree with that. Yeah, it would have been a little more heavy-handed or clunkily handled, whereas here I thought it was a nice little light touch,
Yeah,
but still a good reference to that character's history and its importance
yeah.
to a big group of people.
And
But yeah,
I gotta say they've done with this Fantastic Four movie. They've definitely leaned more into the actual source material far more than any other Fantastic Four movie before this, which is
oh
great.
yeah, oh
There's
yeah,
a lot more. They're taking a lot more from that source material now. As you've said yourself, like I am not like a big Fantastic Four person. I don't know all the lore, but it felt like they used a lot of it.
yeah, I would agree with that 100%, especially that early lore. And because I don't think it's a coincidence that of all the movies that have come out where Jack Kirby was a original writer for the character, this is one that like makes a direct reference to him and has like a in memoriam, even though he died in the mid '90s. To him, the universe itself is a reference to his birthday, like I said. So it feels like it is like, hey, we are really telling you guys our inspiration here, and it's Jack Kirby and those early run of comics.
Yeah, two things before I forget. I do like the fact that Mole Man. I keep coming back to him. It
Yes, he's
was a
great.
was a Chekhov's gun for this movie. It was like a
Mm,
one-liner beginning and a montage at the beginning. They could have just never come back to him, but later on, he helped save the city.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, he's
which
great.
is I just found it interesting because a lot of times, like every other villain we saw, they never brought back up again. But Mole Man, they did. Like I say, he was like the Chekhov's gun for it. But we referenced that first Fantastic Four movie, which is done solely so they can maintain the IP.
Hmm.
Those four actors, I understand, are in the movie as cameos.
Really, that's cool. I
Yeah,
love it when that kind of stuff happens.
just to give them actually a chance to be on the screen. Because when that movie was made, there was no intent to ever put that on the screen, and those actors did not know that. Imagine putting in months of work on something that will never see the light of day, and they knew that at the beginning. It's not like something where it happened like with Batgirl and later on they shelved it. This is something
Hmm.
where they knew they would make a full length movie and then never show it.
Yeah, yeah, that is a really interesting example. There's like a really I would recommend. I can check in a second what it's called, but there's a documentary about the making of that movie that is really fascinating. And I just did a whole panel about like studios and the director's cuts and how they will often cut out chunks of film, whereas that movie they cut out the entire film. So that is like you said, it was only made to keep an IP. So yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah, I'm looking here and it does say yeah they the '94 film they all make cameo appearances and it's also saying like yeah the Wikipedia is backing up here what you said about Robert Downey being in the film, and that comes from EW, which is a reputable source. That's not like that's not like we've got this covered or something like that, where you can never believe anything you say. But yeah, that seems to be a real source. So
Yeah. So if any of my listeners are listening in right now, see, this was not a steelbook fact. I actually did my research and I looked it up.
very
Um,
cool.
the I lost my train of thought on that movie. Oh, so I went to see this at the Alamo Draft House, and they've got these little
Mhm.
like vignettes before every movie if you get there early enough. And one they had on there, and I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was making his pitch for the second Fantastic Four movie,
Mhm.
and his pitch was that they need to get all the actors in from the four different Fantastic Four iterations. The one that never saw the light
Mm.
of day,
Yeah.
the Fox version of it, and that weird reboot that occurred. And then this one, because now you've got four teams of Fantastic Four multiverse. And he said you call it four to the second power, because it's the second movie. And
Yeah.
you've got, which in four to the second power is 16. So you got all 16 characters in there.
Mhm.
And you're retelling the original Fantastic Four story from the one that was never saw the light of day, just so we all get to see that story.
Yeah, I would love to see, and honestly, I think there's a very good chance that a lot of those actors will crop up in, Doomsday and Endgame. I think they'll cross over. I would also love to see Maria Bamford, who uh, kind of plays the Invisible Woman, because she plays a actress who plays her. She basically plays a fictionalized version of one of the actors from the '94 film in Arrested Development, and so I would think it would be really funny if they gave her a cameo. But yeah, so that would be really cool to see. Hopefully, they all get to come back in some capacity. Um, any final thoughts here on Fantastic Four: First Steps before we wrap up?
No, I'd just say if you have not seen the movie and you actually listened to all the spoilers we've just given, go out and see the movie. And I think it's a good movie for the big screen. It's, there's some movies that it's okay watching on the TV, watch on the small screen, wait till it comes to streaming. This one, go find a matinee if you don't want to pay full price, but go see it on the big screen because it is a spectacle in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah, I would really agree with that. And if it's playing in all the premium formats, I'm a big proponent of Dolby. I know people love IMAX, which IMAX is great. I love a Dolby movie because I feel like they really the sound and the picture is so immersive and incredible, and they have the seats where things shake, and with just like whenever Galactus is walking around, it just like the chair shakes you. So yeah, go out and see this movie on the biggest screen you can. I completely agree. And then the one thing I will add, I will say the documentary I mentioned is called Doomed: The Untold Story of Roger Corman's The Fantastic Four. Highly recommend checking that movie out. It's very fascinating doc about the production of that movie. And gives those actors kind of a chance to shine. But yeah, thank you so much for being on, Chris. This was an absolute blast. One more time, where can people find you and your podcast?
Sure. The best place to find me is over at Movie Smash. Like I said, we release an episode every other week. We're doing sort of a fun dive. A good way to think about it is just think of three friends and occasional guest at a diner talking about a movie they just saw. And it could be from 20 years ago. It could be from last year. But it's always based on a comic book movie, a comic book or a graphic novel. And not for the MCU because they already have a lot of people talking about them. Like here.
Yeah.
and you can always find me over at Off Panel Creations. I'm always building some piece of nerdy furniture over there. So come take a look and say hi.
Very nice, very nice. And yeah, if anyone out there is listening for the first time because you're come over here from Movie Smash, I would love to check out my other stuff that I do as well. I do another podcast called Underrated. That one comes out more on more of a schedule, I'll say, than this one, and that would be out every other Monday. That is a show where I talk about films that are underrated or underappreciated. I'm in the middle of doing a Leica retrospective where I am talking about the films of the studio Leica, all the stop motion films that they have done. So I've got a couple episodes of that released. I'm also going to be uploading to the video that's from Comic-Con, the panel that I just hosted on, as I mentioned, the hidden value of a director's cut. That'll be up soon, so stay tuned for that. That'll also, of course, also be on my YouTube, so just look up Underrated Movie Podcast everywhere, or go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. And I also do another show called Midnight Film Society with my friend Damien, where we talk about recently released stuff. I'm doing a lot of podcast stuff, so check all that out. The easiest place to find a list of all that is underratedmoviepodcast.com. But yeah, Chris, one more time, thank you for coming and discussing Fantastic Four: First Steps with me.